Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shrivasadi Go Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. One more time, everybody. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. One more time, please. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Thank you. I guess I just sit in the chair. And no one's allowed to watch while I try to get up. It's okay. This is going to happen to most of you too. If you're lucky. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militang Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukhaṁ Karoti Vachalam Pangum Lankayate Girim Yat Kripa Tamaham Bande Shri Gurun Dinataranam Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha. Thank you. I'm honored and delighted and humbled by being invited here. This is a community I haven't been to, but many of whom I've probably met, but not here. Anyone met me before? Anyone in here met me before, except for Subhadra? So that means you haven't been to Honolulu? Oh, okay. I meet folks from ISV when they're on vacation in Honolulu all the time. And even though I haven't been here before, I have a sense of the kind of community that you all have developed here, and I'm really grateful to have been invited. Vrindavan Natabara Prabhu dragged me. He pushed me. He just went ahead and made arrangements, and he said, "This is what you're doing this weekend," and I couldn't be happier. And I've known Vaisheshika Prabhu and Nirakula for a long time. I remember when Nirakula and Jagarini came to LA. I happened to have just gotten there myself, I think. I was living on a farm on the Big Island just before that. And for several years at the Honolulu Temple. And it was kind of I don't know, everyone kind of noticed when the four of them showed up in New Dwarka. And I think I must have met Vaisheshika Prabhu in the early 80s when he was still a brahmachari. And I remember he came through Honolulu and he was like I don't know. Well, he was a dynamo. He was kind of a spark plug. I thought I'd think of him as a spark plug or a light bulb because he was so just effulgent and brimming with enthusiasm for Krishna consciousness. And I've always, ever since, I've always been impressed by his service. I thought I would talk tonight just a little bit about something that you all are probably familiar with. I wanted to talk about Shraddha and Sharanagati. Now, there are a couple of ways we think of Shraddha. One is as one of the 9 stages of bhakti that Srila Rupa Goswami mentions in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So the first stage is Adau Shraddha, an initial faith. Sometimes Srila Prabhupada would describe that initial faith as just some appreciation. Oh, these people aren't so bad after all. Maybe I'll listen. Sometimes I think of that initial faith as someone who's actually willing to stop and listen for a moment. My old dear friend Subhadra has embarked on her second book a day campaign, and she just tries to stop people. And I know I'm the kind of person who was not I was not very successful as a book distributor. Um, I'm maybe just, I don't know, too introverted or something, but somehow or other I could never even get people to stop. I thought, well, what do I have to do? Throw a body block or something to get this person to stop for a moment and listen. It was very difficult for me. Um, but I know that Subhadra is also kind of a retiring person. Um, Although with either of us, I mean, we're not necessarily big talkers, but once you get us going, watch out. um, so that adau shraddha, and then what comes out of that, what comes from that shraddha, it gradually develops into um, sadhu sangha, actually accepting the association of devotees. And Srila Rupa Goswami mentions when he mentions sadhu sangha in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he says that there are three qualities that we should be looking for. When he mentions sadhu sangha, and I think this is when it shows up as one of the five at the end of the list of 64 um, facets of sadhana bhakti, for 64 practices. I think this is where he says it. It's just one line. It says, Sajati ashaye snigte sadhu sangus svato vare. So three qualities that we're looking for in the association of devotees. One is swajati ashaye. Jata has to do with family, birth, caste, kind, class, that kind of thing. Group. So swajati ashaye, same group, same family, similar sentiments. Sometimes devotees describe it as like-mindedness. I frankly prefer to refer to it as like-heartedness because I think it's more to the point. It's not so much about what's in our head as is what's going on in our heart, where our heart is inclined. And then the second quality is snigdha, which is affection. Snigdhasya means affectionately disposed. And the third is svato vare. Just like we sometimes, I've been last couple of days at Vrindavan, and Nattabara was telling me about one of my old dear friends and godbrothers, Archita, was chiding him for not dancing enthusiastically enough in the kirtan. And he says, your name is Nattabara. What is it's just useless if you're not going to dance. So vara means best or better, means superior. And svato vare means they're superior to us. They're a little more advanced than we are. So those are the qualities that we're looking for. And then after that comes bhajana kriya, where the relationship with the devotees becomes thick enough that we actually want to engage systematically in growing our faith. And all these stages, essentially, all these 9 stages are essentially faith that's becoming deeper, broader and deeper. It's really a growth of our faith. And when we talk about faith, we're not talking about, I think it was C.S. Lewis. I think he wrote an essay called Mere Belief. I think we're not talking about mere belief, because beliefs can change. When I was a little boy, I believed that President Eisenhower was the greatest man in the world. Well, that was when I was like maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. And I believed other things later. I grew up going to a Methodist church when I was mm, until I was about 8. Um, my family, my father's family, is from a little town on the Central Coast. Um, Probably people have heard of it more lately, called Lompoc in Santa Barbara County. Actually, my great great grandfather was one of the founders of Lompoc. Uh, and so I'm a fifth generation Californian and a fifth generation Lompocan. And because we were a somewhat prominent family, my grandfather was the municipal judge and a large landowner. Um, we went to church. We went to church every Sunday, and I went to Sunday school. Now, when we moved away from Lompoc, um, my father, who was actually agnostic probably since he was 18, there's a story behind that, but this isn't the time for it, um, preferred to go scuba diving with his buddies on Sundays rather than to church. My mom was busy raising 3 kids, and I ended up being the only person in my family who went to church regularly from then on. But I didn't go to a Methodist church because the new friends that I had made at my new school went to a Presbyterian church, which was also convenient. It was an easy walk for me, maybe a 10 or 15-minute walk from our house. So, so for a while, I guess I would have believed that I was a Presbyterian. And then later, when we moved to Virginia, I started going to Methodist churches again until I discovered the Episcopal Church, which was more, well, this one church that I started going to, the minister had a very ecumenical spirit. And when he made a call for communion, it was for anybody who had faith in Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. And you didn't have to be confirmed in the Episcopal Church. You didn't have to be confirmed in any church. And that appealed to me, that ecumenical spirit, that breadth of acceptance really appealed to me because I ran into something when I was going to this Presbyterian church in the 6th grade. In 6th grade Sunday school, they started teaching us um, about how bad Roman Catholics were and how crazy their beliefs were. And it just didn't make any sense to me because I knew Catholic kids and they seemed perfectly cool to me and perfectly Christian, or at least as Christian as I could figure. So our beliefs change. Um, our political beliefs may change. I think it was Winston Churchill, who said, if someone isn't a liberal when he's 20, he has no heart. And if he's not a conservative when he's 40, he has no head. So he's expecting people's political beliefs to change. And so we're not talking about belief because belief can be very malleable. When we're talking about Shraddha, we're talking about something completely different. And that's described by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to Sanatana Goswami as recounted by Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami in this 22nd chapter of Madhya Lila of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. So he has Mahaprabhu saying to Sanatan, Shraddha Shabde Vishwas Kohe Sudhara Nishchoy, Krishna Bhakti Koile Sarva Karma Krita Hoy. So what we call Shraddha, Shraddha Shabde, by the word Shraddha, what we mean is, now Srila Prabhupada gives it as faith, but Vishvasa is actually conviction. And this isn't just mediocre conviction. It's not even firm conviction. It doesn't say drudha. It says sudrudha. Su is an intensifier in this context. So it means very, very firm conviction. In what? Krishna Bhakti Koile Sarva Karma Krita Hoy. That by engaging in devotional service to Krishna, Everything else I might desire is already accomplished. And I really like this sudradha. It's confident, very firm faith, and very firm conviction. And conviction grows out of experience. It's not just something, it's not just the last thing I've heard, not just the last thing someone said to me, you know. And there we know, we even know of politicians who seem to kind of respond to the world like that. What they seem to believe and the policies they seem to come up with seem to come out of the last convincing person that they happen to have spoken to. But conviction comes out of experience, and you know we see several places in Srimad Bhagavatam how spiritual life comes from hmm, uh, our faith in material progress having been eroded. One place we see is in the third chapter of the 11th canto. King Nimi, the king of Idea, is having a big sacrifice, and it's visited by these 9 sages, the Navayogendra, these 9 of King Rishabhadev's 100 sons. And Nimi recognizes his opportunity and he seizes it. And so he receives them and starts asking them. He asks each of them a question. And of the sage Prabuddha, he asks, how is it that even a materialistic person like me can actually make spiritual progress? How can that happen? And Prabhuda's response is to kind of very concisely go through the whole range of all the things that we find desirable. So the first thing he talks about is the pleasure of being in an intimate relationship, the pleasure of sex, even. And sex, it's a very strong motivator in this world. My godbrother, Swami Tripurari, told me a story once when he was in New York City visiting Srila Prabhupada, and they were on the roof of the skyscraper building that they owned for a few years on 55th Street. 55. I don't know anything about New York, so I'm guessing it was 55th Avenue or 55th Street. And he had this is probably 1975. Tripurari Maharaj had just accepted sannyas, and he was like 25 years old or something. And so he's sitting with Srila Prabhupada on the roof, and Prabhupada asks him, have you seen the women of New York? See, have you noticed how beautiful the women of New York City are? And Maharaj is sitting there thinking, oh my God, is this a test? I mean, I'm sitting here with my spiritual master with 2 sannyasi, and I'm a brand new sannyasi, and he's asking me about if I'd noticed how beautiful the women are in New York City. You know, he didn't know what to make of it, and probably kept going and pushing me. Have you seen? And then he said, all this is manifested because of men trying to please these beautiful women in New York City. So sex is a very, very powerful motivator. And let's face it, addictive. You know, I mean, it's you know, it's such a great pleasure, but it's ultimately not really satisfying. And because of our commitment to these intimate relationships, we have to undergo so much trouble. You know, we have to go to work. We have to endure the entire pavarga, right? In Sanskrit, you've got these different vargas, the different groups of the consonants, the kavarga, the chavarga, the tavarga, the tavarga, and the pavarga. And so you got pa, pa, ba, ba, ma. And so it starts out with hard work, foaming at the mouth, pa, pa, ba. I can't remember what ba is. What is ba? Oh, bhayam, that's ba. fear, and then ultimately mrityu, death. So we get caught up in those, and then he says, wealth. Oh, to gain wealth, we so much trouble. We have to compete with each other, and it's just awful, and it's ultimately not satisfying. And but then even svarga, the ultimate pleasure, right? You practically, it seems, at least by our measurements, you live practically forever, and you can enjoy pleasures that are really beyond what we can imagine. And he says, and then he says, once we've seen through all of these things, once we've become dissatisfied with all these things, then he says, Tasmad gurum prapadyeta jigyasu shaya uttama shabde parecha nishnatam brahmanyupashamash. Then we need a guru. I mean, if we were to ask who needs a guru, the answer is not necessarily everybody, because not everybody's ready. I was discussing this with a devotee yesterday who feels her father is inclined, and so she tried to get him interested in reading Bhagavad Gita, and finally he admitted to her, maybe I'm just not ready. It's not that he's rejecting it. He's just thinking, because he's just too attached to the other things. I mean, when Srila Rupa Goswami describes the qualifications for bhakti in the first chapter of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he says, first of all, every human being is qualified for bhakti. And this is something I was speaking about in Los Angeles last night at their Mantra House program. Every human being is qualified for bhakti. Then he discusses different gradations of qualification. But one of the things that we can infer from that is that we have to actually become really human. We have to get in touch with our humanness to be qualified. And then he says, and human beings who are really qualified for bhakti, who are ready for bhakti, they're neither too attached to material enjoyment nor too detached from material enjoyment. It's a middle way, right? Bhakti, I like to speak of it sometimes as a user-friendly spiritual path. Bhakti is distinct from every other spiritual path in that to attain the goals of karma, well, karma is not really a spiritual path. We think of it as spiritual-ish because we connect it with dharma. But, if you want to actually attain the real results of karma, you have to do everything right. If you make a mistake, say if you're doing some yajna and you make a mistake in pronouncing one of the mantras, you might not get the results you wanted. You might get the opposite result, as we see in the 6th canto, right? So you have to do everything perfectly. And yoga, same thing. You have this very elaborate process described in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras of calming, your mind and everything so that you can meditate on Krishna. And how much, does anyone know how much of the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, actually address asana? Any guesses? 10%. I hear a 10%. Do I have a 20? Do I have a 20%? 20%, 10% going once? 10%. No. 1%. Out of the 1,200 words in the Yoga Sutras, 11 or 12 address asana. It's not unimportant. The reason for asana is to keep our bodies fit so we can sit still and meditate. If our bodies aren't fit, then, well, you saw me trying to get up from the harmonium. And a part of that is brahmacharya, right? You're not going to hear that at your 24-hour fitness yoga class. It's really not about just checking out everybody in their Lululemons or whatever, I don't know if you, maybe Lululemons are passe. I'm not sure, but there's still a thing. Okay. I've seen Lululemon stores now that I think about it. Somewhere I saw a Lululemon store and I thought, what? Okay. Um, you're not going to get that really stilling your senses so that you can get perception of the super soul of the Paramatma without doing it perfectly. Jnana, same thing. You've got to do it just right in order to get that sayuja moksha that they're after, and that also includes a life of celibacy. So that's a little rough, but bhakti is user friendly. We see throughout the Bhagavatam, you don't have to do it perfectly in order to get the result. Even if you don't finish in one particular lifetime, you don't lose anything. Krishna tells us even in the Gita, in the second chapter of the Gita, Nehavikramanashast. So that, whatever we've gained in practicing bhakti in this particular path, you don't lose it. And we just kind of like pick up. There's a little catch-up time from one lifetime to the next. We see that in each other sometimes. I know of so many, especially, well, I kind of even see it in my own life, but in a lot of newer devotees, I see this. Oh, this is not this person's first kirtan. They've been here before, and they're just kind of like catching up. And but so and we see in the 11th canto that you can't really fall down even as if you were running blind. It's complete. And we see in the 5th chapter of the 1st canto, Narada Muni instructing Vyasadeva says if you engage in Varnashram Dharma perfectly, you don't really gain anything because whatever you get is temporary. It'll wear out. Just as we see in the Gita, when you're even attaining Swarga, when your pious credit wears out, Chine Punyal Martyr-lokam Vishant. We have to come back down to a dump like this place. But he says, but bhakti, nothing's ever lost. And in the 19th verse, he says, here's the thing about bhakti. Even if someone falls away somehow or other from their practice, they're always going to remember that taste they got by serving the lotus feet, by embracing the Lord's lotus feet through service. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur makes a very, and I highly recommend reading Srila Prabhupada, rereading Srila Prabhupada's purport to verse 19 in the 5th chapter of the 1st canto. It's a wonderful, very generous commentary. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary is even stronger. Prabhupada kind of softens the word rasagraha. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains rasagraha means someone who has a taste that they can't forget. It's like a ghost they can't shake, haunted by rasa. And when does that begin? Because we're thinking, oh, rasagraha must be like at least bhava. And Vishwanath says, no, it starts from the very first day of worshiping the Lord. So bhakti is very, very user-friendly. And each of us who practices has our experience of that. We have some conviction that even though I may not be able to completely commit to it, but still I'm going to keep trying because I know that if I can actually engage in bhakti, actually satisfy the Lord, everything else is ultimately going to be taken care of. And then Lord Chaitanya gives as evidence this famous verse from the 4th canto of the Bhagavatam, Yata Tora Mula Nishechanena. It says, by pouring water on the root of a tree, one automatically satisfies the trunk, branches, and twigs. Similarly, by supplying food to the stomach, where it nourishes the life air, one satisfies all the senses. In the same way, by worshiping Krishna and rendering service to him, we automatically satisfy all the devatas, all the demigods. And then he explains how these gradations of devotees are determined by the depth of their faith. Um, Now, what does this have to do with Sharanagati? Well, Sharanagati is the external expression of Shraddha. When we have that conviction, it becomes expressed by our engaging in these 6 angas of Sharanagati. You're supposed to do what I say. There we go. Um, and, we know what these are. Anukulyasya sankalpa, pratikulyasya varjanam, rakshashyatiti vishvasa. Oh, there's that vishvasa again, right? Goptrate varanam tata, atmani kshepa, karpane shadvida sharanagati. These 6 kinds of things. Accepting whatever is favorable for the culture of bhakti, neglecting or even rejecting things that are not. Rakshashyatiti vishvasa, the conviction, again, conviction, that Krishna will protect me in all circumstances. Goptrate varanam tata, accepting Krishna as our exclusive maintainer. One of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's songs in his Sharanagati, book of songs on Sharanagati, he has this wonderful image. He says, um, uh, I'll just be your dog. Tie me up outside your home, and I'll chase away everyone who comes to bother you. And for my maintenance, whatever scraps, whatever remnants of your food you want to give me, that's what I'll live on. This is a wonderful image. Atmanikshepa, or Atma Samarpana, Atma Nivedana. Nikshepa literally, as I understand it, means casting away. Just like we see at the end of the Bhagavad Gita. Sarvatarman parityajya. He doesn't say just tyajya. He strengthens it. Parityajya, completely reject all conventional senses of dharma. In other words, completely forget all the stuff that we've just been talking about. Just take shelter of me exclusively. I've got you covered. I've got your back. And the Bhagavatam starts, Dharma prochita kaitava paramo nirmatsaranam satam. For those who have completely rejected, already completely rejected, and then the language is quite strong, completely rejected what? Kaitava dharma. Cheating religion. Krishnadas Kaviraj explains that in Chaitanya Charitamrita in this same chapter when he comes to that second verse of the Bhagavatam. And he says, so what do we mean when we say kaitava dharma, when we say cheating religion? He says, well, here's what we're talking about. Dharma, artha, kama, moksha, vancha. That could scandalize a lot of Hindu folks, for whom those 4 Purusharthas is the whole thing, right? That's the whole show right there. I mean, what else is there other than virtue, progress that you make through virtuous behavior, pleasure that you get from the progress that you make, and the freedom that you seek when you realize the whole thing was a big scam. You know, and he says, so the Bhagavatam says completely rejecting. So Atmanikshepa means completely casting away any interest other than the Lord's interest, is how Srila Prabhupada often translates this. Atmanivedana, Atmanikshepa, having no interest other than the Lord's interest, and then being very humble. And these things will manifest in our character when we have that conviction that if I just engage wholeheartedly in Krishna Bhakti, everything else will be taken care of. All my obligations to the devatas, to my ancestors, maybe not to the government. Well, at least the government's not going to buy it. But ultimately, all these things are taken care of simply by dedicating ourselves um, to the service of Krishna and his devotees, because Krishna tells us also throughout the Bhagavatam that he's all about his devotees. He says, I am in their hearts. This is when he's speaking with Durvasha Muni in the ninth canto, right? Durvasha Muni has offended King Ambarish. King Ambarish found himself in an impossible situation, especially considering that the person approaching him was Durvasha Muni. It was time for him to complete a fast. But Durvasha Muni showed up right then. And he thought, okay, let me compromise. I'll just take a little bit of water. That'll kind of break the fast because that's my intention. And Durvasha Muni was having none of it. And he says, how dare you take care of your own needs before me? Because he's that kind of guy. And the Sudarshan Chakra took exception to that, and chased him all over the universe. And he approached Brahma, he approached Shiva for relief, and they just kind of like shrugged and said, sorry, pal. And ultimately he approached Lord Narayan, and Lord Narayan said, sorry, pal, I can't help you. You offended my Vaishnava. And he says, I am in the Vaishnava's hearts and they're in mine. He says, I don't know anything. They don't know anything but me, and I don't know anything but them. I am not at all independent of my devotees. So we want to serve not just the Lord, but also his devotees. When Lord Shiva was asked by Parvati, what's the highest form of worship? His response was, Aradhananam sarvesham Vishnuradhanam param. Of all the forms of worship there are, highest is the worship of Vishnu. Now you might imagine that Parvati might have felt a little downcast at that moment because she's serving him. And then he continued. He says, Tasmat paratarang devi, tadyanam samarchanam. But even higher than that is serving those things that are related to Krishna. Whew. Because Vaishnavanam yata Shambhu, as we see in the 12th canto of the Bhagavatam, that of all the Vaishnavas, we can see Lord Shiva as the best. So this is our path. This is our Sharanagati is actually one of the 64 angas of sadhana bhakti. It's written in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu as Sharanapati. And for some Vaishnavas, that's the process. That's their process of attaining what they call, like some of the Sri Vaishnavas, their goal is moksha. It's Vaikuntha prema, but they refer to it as moksha. That's we see a couple of the different forms of liberation there, right? You live on the same planet as the Lord. You have a form like the Lord's. You enjoy opulence like the Lord's. And for them, the process is largely, for many of them, the process is largely Sharanapati. So this is one of the 64 angas of bhakti. And it's actually as Bhaktivinoda Thakur called, and he got it from one of the Sandarbhas, and I'm trying to remember, probably the Bhakti Sandarbha, that this is the external expression of our Shraddha, our faith. Just asserting our faith, professing our faith, isn't the real thing. We actually have to live our faith. When I was in high school, every other year at my high school, we would do a musical comedy production. And so when I was a junior, we did My Fair Lady, and based on the Bernard Shaw's Pygmalion play Pygmalion. And in My Fair Lady, there's one of the things that's going on is this young high-class man named Freddie, can't remember his last name now. falls in love with Eliza Doolittle, who was actually a flower girl, flower seller from a really low-class family, whose mannerisms have been transformed by the tutelage of Professor Henry Higgins, and who's kind of an amateur linguist. And one of the songs in that is "Show Me," where Elijah's saying, "Don't talk of love, don't talk all this highfalutin stuff. Show me now. Show me you love me." So this is, by engaging in these 6 angas of Sharanagati, this is our expression of our faith, our firm, very firm conviction that that by engaging in Krishna Bhakti, everything else will be taken care of. So I'll be happy to stop here and open things up for any discussion. Anyone has anything to share or add, or any questions to ask? Yes.
Thank you so much, Maharaj, for coming to the Bay Area and also coming to our home. This is such a great privilege for all of
My
us,
pleasure.
and such a nice katha and a very beautiful topic. When Natavar Prabhu, Vrindavan Natavar Prabhu sent the topic, I was really excited. Thank you, Maharaj. So Maharaj, in the devotion, so we tend to be committed. Like we took initiation, we are going to the temple, we are doing services. What are the few things to so that we can determine that we are progressing in our bhakti? At the same time, what are the few things for us to note that we are actually regressing and make some corrections in the progress of bhakti?
Well, the key, of course, is good association. And if we have confidential friends, if we have people we can confide in, our guru and other friends as well, people that we trust. That's what we mean when we say confidential friends, people in whom we can actually confide, people who we can trust to share our deepest experiences in our hearts. Sometimes even just by listening, not even necessarily by advice, just by listening, they can help. But how can we see? Well, one, we can gauge, we can kind of understand where how we come up short um, by the I was going to say lack of progress, but by the slow pace of our progress. Um, at the same time, we need to remember that the first three of the things we see in the Upadeshamrita that are favorable for bhakti are utsahan, nischayat, and dhairyat. Um, and this is something that I've been emphasizing for a while, and I was very gratified last year when we had visits from a couple of my sannyasi godbrothers, Bir Krishna Maharaj and Bhakti Marg Swami. They both did the same thing. They both emphasized these first three: enthusiasm, confidence, and patience. And so we need to understand. It's good for us to understand where we might fall short, and we can analyze. Sometimes just by talking with a confidential friend. Some people do it by journaling. Is also. I mean, I used to keep a journal every day. I think when my life changed, when I left family life, I think it kind of sort of faded away for some reason, and I don't know why, because then there was even more stuff to pay attention to as I was withdrawing from family life. Um, and some people um, by therapy, because sometimes the things that are hindering our progress progress just might be samskaras that we have to deal with, old patterns of behavior that are a result um, of of old karma, not just in this life, but who knows how many lifetimes. And sometimes you have generational karma, karma that comes from your family as well. And so, and how do we know when we're making progress? Oh, there's a really nice verse that I'll share with you if I can find it quickly enough. And interestingly, as I was sitting, as we are coming here in the car, I oh, I forgot that. I wanted to talk about that. Somehow or other, I ended up closing all my Bhagavatam files. Where is this? Yeah, well, it's 11:242. Bhakti pareshano bhavo virakti ranyatra anyway, three things happen simultaneously and progressively as we engage in devotional service. Bhakti pareshano bhavo and virakti ranyatra. So bhakti, well, that's inherent in the activity, some devotion for the Lord, and it grows. I do want to find that verse because the purport is, well, actually, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary it clarifies it so well. I can't see where this is still 5th chapter. That's 3. The second thing, bhakti pareshanubhava virakti. Pareshanubhava means some direct experience of the Lord. And it doesn't necessarily need to be some spurti, or some like big revelation. Sometimes it can just be appreciating a good kirtan, really heartfelt Hari Katha, or a nice enlightening discourse on the Lord. And then the next thing is viraktiranyatracha, detachment from everything else. And that verse compares it. I don't remember which of the sages is speaking. This is in the 2nd chapter. It may be Havi or Kavi, but I'd have to look. This is something I haven't straightened out yet. And some friends of mine made a little chart so that I could my right brain could process it, and I might be able to easily remember, but I haven't actually memorized that chart. It compares it to eating a meal. How do we know if we're actually eating a meal? 3 things happen simultaneously and progressively as we eat. Tushti, pushti, kshudapaya. Tushti is pleasure, pushti, nourishment, and kshudapaya, relief from hunger. And so Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains that, and he uses this as a sort of pramana verse, or his evidence for when he says at the end of his commentary on 1.5.19 that it begins from the very first day of worshiping the Lord. This is his evidence. This verse is his evidence. Because when we're taking a meal, there's immediate pleasure and nourishment and a little bit of slaking of our hunger. And he explains in his commentary that just as someone who eats a little is going to feel a little pleasure, you're going to experience a little pleasure, a little nourishment, and a little relief from hunger. And someone who eats a complete meal, as I did before we started our program, experiences complete pleasure. There was so much pleasure there, and it was very nourishing, not just the stuff in the food, but the hearts that went into the preparation and the offering, and complete relief from hunger. I mean, I've had this experience, especially when I was a brahmachari. I don't know how many times you know, you, you live your austere life all week long, and we would kind of live for the Sunday feast. In the Honolulu, we were very poor in the Honolulu temple in those early days, 1969, 70, 71, 72, 3. Very, very poor. I could tell you how poor, but it might curl your hair. So we would kind of live for the Sunday feast, and we'd serve our guests on maybe paper plates or something like that, and we had these army trays, stainless steel army trays, that we would eat off. And I don't know how many times I'd said it, oh my God, I don't think I ever have to eat again. Of course, then the next morning, because I was like 23, of course, the next morning I was hungry again. So he says, when someone engages in, when someone serves the Lord a little, they get a little experience of the Lord and a little detachment from everything else. And but if they wholeheartedly engage in bhakti, then they get complete experience of the Lord and complete detachment from everything else. And then he points out where the analogy breaks down. He says, you can't keep eating forever. He says, but by serving, you get the power to continue to serve even more. That's the flaw in the analogy. That's where the difference is. So I don't know. Is that a little helpful? Subhadra?
You were talking about enthusiasm, confidence, and patience. And so when we get good association, we get really enthusiastic, sometimes more than we're qualified to back up. So I get the patience thing too, but then we have, like you said, some skaras or maybe some things that cause self-defeating patterns. So we've got this good association, the enthusiasm, and we really want to go for it, but then we fall short again and again and again sometimes. So then the confidence starts to wane, and the enthusiasm, it's hard sometimes after failing for a long time, then you start feeling like, oh, why try that hard again? Why get my hopes up again? I'm just going to do the same thing or fail again or come up short again.
But generally, we'll see. If we actually are paying attention, we may find that we come up a little less short each time. There's and it's that practice, that regular practice creates different samskaras. We actually, we're creating bhakti samskaras in our chitta, in our heart, by daily chanting our 16 rounds and associating with devotees and doing all the things that we do as sadhakas. There's an anecdote about Pablo Casals. He was the preeminent cellist in the 20th century. He was very widely regarded as the greatest cellist of the 20th century. He was kind of like the greatest cellist in the world before Yo-Yo Ma. And there's an anecdote. I've seen a couple of different versions of this anecdote, but the essence is the same. And I'm not 108% sure that this actually happened, but I don't care. If it didn't happen, it ought to have. So a young journalist was interviewing Maestro Casals in his 90s. And so by that time, his performing career was way in the rearview mirror. He didn't perform anymore. So he mentioned to her that he practiced cello several hours every day, something like 3-4 hours. And he said, by practice, I don't mean playing pieces. I mean running scales and doing exercises. And she was like, what? So I asked him, Maestro, I mean, you don't even, you don't even perform publicly anymore. Why is it that you practice so much every day? And he said, I think I'm making progress. I don't, if that story isn't literally, historically, empirically true, it ought to be, because the point is just so wonderful. When I read that, the first time I read that story, I just thought, oh my gosh, that's the story of our life as sadhakas. We keep going, even if it's hoping against hope that we're going to make some progress. And because that practice creates different samskaras, new samskaras, and what is it? Prabhupada quoted this, well-worn old saw in English. Oh shucks, I just lost it now. But sometimes we say practice makes perfect. But that's not. I don't think perfection is even really a useful goal. Progress is a useful goal, because if we're always striving for perfection, we're always going to see how we're falling short. If we compare ourselves with others, we're always going to see how we're falling short. Or we may bolster, we may feed our false ego, thinking, oh, this guy is having so much trouble chanting his japa, but I'm hot, snick, snick, rama, rama, snick, snick, rama, rama. I get all my 16 rounds done in 45 minutes. And this poor guy, 2.5 hours, he's still struggling with his japa. And meanwhile, this guy is just pouring his heart into every syllable of every mantra. So, we want to watch out. We want to watch out for those things. And that kind of association we're looking for is going to be the kind of people who encourage us. I think this is something that I heard from Keshava Maharaj, the young Indo-British sannyasi, very inspirational. Everybody, even the men's hearts go pitter-patter when we hear him or see him, because he's tall, he's beautiful, he's brilliant, he's charismatic. And he made a point in one of the, I think it was in a presentation that he gave at the ISKCON Leadership Sangha in Mayapur. Might have been in a class that he gave, but I think it was in his ILS presentation, that a real leader is someone who wants you to become better than they are. There's someone who's there, they're always helping us progress. So that's the kind of association we want, that's always encouraging us. Oh, sure, okay, you're having some problems. Guess what? That's natural, right? I mean, these 9 angas, these 9 stages of bhakti are described in a little detail in a little book that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur wrote 300 and some years ago called Madhurya Kadambini. And we see those first stages, they're bumpy. Okay, Adao Shadha, that seems pretty cool. I'm starting to figure out bhakti's kind of cool, and I found myself in the association of devotees. I've gotten myself initiated, and I've got a practice that's prescribed by my guru, and but then there are these things that we have to deal with before our practice can become steady. And the first one is utsahamai, that unwarranted enthusiasm that Subhadra was mentioning. Like we think we've arrived somewhere that we haven't actually. We used to call it the pure devotee syndrome. Oh, I've been chanting 16 rounds for 3.5 months. I must be in bhava by now, And there are some other things that we have to deal with. And then there's the stage of anartha nivritti. So this is just anishtita bhajana kriya. And then when our bhajana kriya becomes steadier, we still have to go through anartha nivritti before we get to actual steady practice. And anartha nivritti has its own pitfalls. And when we were talking about these different problems in anishtita bhajana kriya, I was talking about this when with some devotees. I was discussing. We were having classes on Madhurya Kadambini discussions, and one of the devotees asked me, "Oh, Maharaj, so how do we avoid these things? This beginner's enthusiasm and the running hot and cold, and enjoying the results of our bhakti and all these things. How do we avoid these things?" And I thought for a moment, and I said, "Oh, we don't." Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has taken the trouble to write this little book to explain these things to us so that we'll understand when we encounter them. And actually not think, "Oh my God, I'm running hot and cold. Sometimes I'm fired up and sometimes I just want to watch YouTube or something." And it's a natural thing. It's part of the process. At first, the path is going to seem narrow and bumpy and tortuous, right? Twisty, maybe even torturous, really painful. But as we move along the path, we find that it becomes smoother, more level, and broader. And so by the time we get to anartha nivritti and ruchi, where we actually get a taste for our practice, then it's kind of smooth sailing. Doesn't mean there won't be, every once in a while the wind might go the wrong way or something like that. But it's generally smooth sailing. It's not so troublesome. So these are natural things, and we should celebrate them. Ooh, running hot and cold. Okay, I'm making progress. At least I'm not infected so much with the pure devotee syndrome anymore. And so that those things are something to celebrate. Another important little book to read, and there are a few translations by some of Srila Prabhupada's disciples that I think are really useful. Bhanu Swami's is very well organized and readable. There are always little editorial problems in Bhanu Maharaj's books, because guess what? He translated, anybody know the number? 168 or something like that books. I went through his catalog when I was in Mayapur 2 years ago. I picked up a copy of his catalog, and I think I counted through, or I just added up each of the categories, and it was like 168 books. And so his idea is get them out. We can go back and clean up the grammar and some of the typos and things like that later. So I find his very useful. There's another one. I can't remember whose now. That's pretty good too. Dina Bandhu did one years ago. I found it a little harder to navigate because it doesn't have like kind of the headings and stuff that I found more useful in other editions. But it's a really cool little book. Yes. Anything else? Yes.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Thank you so much, Maharaj, for the wonderful class on Shraddha to Sharanagati. I have one question on Maharaj. As Grihasthas, working devotees in Bay Area, where life gets sometimes very busy with the professional life, we do our sadhana but also perform occupational duty. So there is two sides of the coin. One feels like, okay, you focus on bhakti, prioritize bhakti, and you can take average job, but the financial things can take time. Versus the other part is, okay, you do your sadhana, your quota of sadhana, but speed up your retirement so that you can spend more time. So it's like, is that another trap of Maya? So if you could shed some light on how to look at these two sides, Maharaj. Thank you.
That's a really wonderful question. And I'm one of the few sannyasis, not just in ISKCON, but I think in all the different sanghas, who actually had a long, happy, successful Krishna. I was married for 40 years, more than 40 years. And this is something that I wrestled with a lot. The way the question came to me was, of course, there's always the thing of how do I organize my time so that I can actually be responsible in my professional life, and at the same time um, give my spiritual life, my sadhana, and my seva as well, my seva to the community of devotees, give them the time and energy that they require as well. And that's a delicate dance. And I think each of us has to figure it out ourselves, but we can also help each other. Those of us who seem to be doing, I want to say balancing the things successfully, but I'm not sure that's the right word, because the way I had it framed in my heart was, what am I looking for? Am I looking for balance between my professional life and my spiritual life, or balance among my professional life, my spiritual life, and my family life? And my family life was generally not very much divorced from our spiritual life, because my wife, my former wife, is, anyone who knows her, you can ask anyone in Alachua, Florida. She's been teaching at the Bhaktivedanta Academy there for 17 or 18 years. And anyone will tell you, the woman's a saint. She's just a really wonderful person and an amazing devotee. And my kids, well, my daughters were a lot more like her than like me in many meaningful ways. They're also a lot like me in some ways. My older daughter became my bodyboarding and surfing buddy for a while, until she met the guy she married. When I saw that he had replaced me as her surfing buddy, I thought, okay, that's it. This is the guy. But looking for the, am I looking for a balance, or am I looking for some kind of integrity, some way to integrate them together? And I don't think I ever really resolved that in my mind. It was kind of an ongoing thing. This was something that I wrote about in my journal, and I would read articles about compartmentalizing the different parts of your life and all that. And it was something that I constantly wrestled with. And I think I kept wrestling with it until all of a sudden everything in my professional life started being, started falling apart, even though I thought, seemed like, I was an English professor. I taught at, I had a tenure track job at Hawaii Community College on the Big Island in Hilo. And then all of a sudden, when it came time for me to apply for tenure, it wasn't granted. And then other things started changing. And it wasn't granted, even though I had good student evaluations and I had good peer evaluations from my colleagues. Actually, many of their evaluations would include things that they picked up from observing my classes. And so it didn't make sense to me, except that it was something providential. And as painful as it was, I had to just kind of like embrace it rather than fight it. Trying to fight it, I think, would have made it even more painful. And it was clear that it was, there were other indications as well, that it was time for me to um, move on to the next part of my life, to make a transition to the next part of my life. It took us a few years to figure out how to make that happen. So, I mean, when I respond to that question, it's not theoretical. It's my own decades of painful experience, trial and error. And we just keep looking for, how we can do each as well as we can. Because we know that our professional lives support not only our families, but our devotional community as well. And that's not something to sniff at, not something to turn your nose up at. When in 1973, this is kind of an extraordinary circumstance, but my former wife and one of my old devotee friends of mine and we had a private meeting with Srila Prabhupada in his room, in his quarters in LA. And something really, but things just had fallen apart among all the temples in Hawaii. Our GBC and temple president gave up his service and closed down all the temples and kind of left the devotees to fend for themselves. And so we went to talk to Srila Prabhupada about this. And one of my friends, Sudama Swami, had arranged this private meeting. Prabhupada kicked out all the big shots. He excused them from the room and asked them to please close the door behind them, because he wanted us to be able to speak openly, confidentially with him. And first thing he did was to check each of us and see how we were doing, see if we were okay. We were still chanting our rounds, following the principles, associating with devotees, if we were still on board with doing service. And he asked this friend of mine, who was, I think at the 25 time, probably, I think he was 25 years old, and he was single. And so Prabhupada had asked him, one question he asked, so where are you staying? And so I'm staying with my family. And Prabhupada said, oh, it's natural that a man wants to stay with his wife and children. And the devotee said, oh, no, I mean, I'm staying with my parents. Prabhupada's eyes opened wide, and it seemed like his eyebrows bounced off the ceiling. And he said, oh, what are you eating? And he said, well, I have an altar in my room. I do all my own cooking, and I offer everything to you. And Srila Prabhupada was pacified. And then he said, so what are you doing to make a living? And he explained that he had a private pilot's license and that he was studying to get an instructor's rating so that he could make a living teaching people to fly airplanes. Now, if those other leaders, God bless their hearts, as we say in the South, had been in the room, they would probably have jumped all over him and said, you're a young guy, you're single, you should move into the temple, shave up, and surrender to us. But that wasn't Srila Prabhupada's response at all. He was completely unfazed. His response was, devotees and devotional service cannot be stereotyped. There's nothing that cannot be engaged in Krishna's service. Simply, we require guidance from the expert spiritual master how to engage everything in Krishna's service. That is the only catch. So we do our best, and we try to do better, and we help each other try to do better. One of the spiritual teachers who came out of the 60s, spiritual, maybe with some air quotes, Ram Dass, former professor Richard Alpert of Harvard University. He's known for saying that we're all just walking each other home. And that really is why we keep Sadhu Sangha, to kind of keep help each other stay on the path, keep advancing, keep making progress. So, sometimes, I think sometimes it would be useful for this to be maybe a topic in ILS or something like that. Have a broader thing, not just something for the people who are like managing temples or something, but let's have conferences on how the Grihastha Vaishnavas can actually find that balance. Of course, here you have, in this community, we have a good example in Vaisheshika Prabhu and Nirakula. They've been exemplary householders. He had his businesses that he was doing before, and now his only business is the family business, right? And so they're and they're both very very wise people. As I said, I've known them both for a long time, and so I think we've got a good advantage, just in the leadership of this community. So many devotees engaged in such intense professional lives here. I mean, I heard somebody talking about, or we were talking earlier about working 4 days a week versus 5 days a week, and that's getting off lucky. If you get, if you can get 5 8-hour days, that would be great. I was an English professor. It's one of the most labor-intensive jobs in the academy. There are no Scantron tests for composition courses. Maybe some literature courses you could do that. But for us, we've got our classes to teach. We have our office hours to keep. We have courses to plan. We have to, plan for the classes we're going to be conducting this week. Oh, and stacks of papers to read. I would wake up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, and I couldn't go back to sleep because I'm thinking about that stack of papers and the date that I promised I would get them back to the students. So I'd end up, 1:30 in the morning, whipping out one of those folders and starting to go through papers. And then when I couldn't take it anymore, I'd turn on C-SPAN and look at, they had some like academic conference thing in the middle of the night, or their book program or something at 3:00 in the morning or something like that. Then I'd go to Mongol and take a shower, go to Mongol Arti, go out for a japa walk, come back, grade some more papers, and go to work. A 40-hour week would have been a godsend. Especially, I mean, for many years I tried to make a living teaching part-time in several different campuses. That's something that's probably fairly common here in the Bay Area. In Southern California, we had a name for ourselves. We called ourselves freeway flyers. You teach a couple of classes in a community college in this district, and you drive to the next community college district, and maybe you'd have a couple of classes at the CSU campus or the UC campus in the area as well. And I remember one semester I was teaching, I think, 8 classes on 3 different campuses, driving sometimes as much as 3 hours a day. And I remember one day I was driving from Southwestern College to my home for lunch. I was driving west on the Interstate 8 to the beaches. And it was the middle of the day, or late morning. So the traffic was light, and where I was driving on a long kind of straight stretch of the 8, and all of a sudden I woke up and I looked at my speedometer, and I was going 80 miles an hour, and the needle was moving. And I thought, okay, this is my last semester teaching on 3 campuses, because I am literally killing myself. So we try to adjust our lives like that the best we can. Sometimes we're able to arrange a work schedule or arrange a fake work schedule that allows us to make room for stronger sadhana or more service or something like that. But it can be a delicate dance, and we we do the best we can. Oh, thank you. That's a great question. Anything else?
Maharaj, I have a question.
Okay.
First of all, thank you for explaining how Sharanagati is external manifestation of Shraddha that is internal to the sadhaka. Maharaj, I have a question when you were explaining about association, quoting Rupa Goswami from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So you're talking about three things, Sajatiya, Snigdha and Satovara. So are all these things must be in one person, or it's kind of getting the things from different places? So what is the it's very difficult to find all the combinations in one person.
Yeah, wouldn't that would be the ideal, wouldn't it? Well, if there's not affection, what kind of relationship can there be anyway, right? And if we don't have at least broadly the same goal, devotional service to Krishna, then that can be a problem. Even other people from other Vaishnava sampradayas. I mean, there's a certain. I mean, it's easy for Sri Vaishnavas and Gaudiya Vaishnavas to appreciate. There's much to appreciate about their paths, but they're also quite different. The Sri Vaishnavas, their goal is moksha. Their process is essentially vaidhi sadhana bhakti. There's no thought of raga anuga bhakti. Their goal is Vaikuntha prem. And most Gaudiya Vaishnavas see that as a kind of it's a nice goal. I mean, we talk generally about going to Vaikuntha, but most of us, that's not what we're really aspiring for. Srila Prabhupada gave us Nectar of Devotion in June of 1970. So he was working on that in 68 and 69. And I remember when that book came out, it was huge. Of course, it was a huge thing because all we had back then were Bhagavad Gita as it is, and the abridged Bhagavad Gita at that, Ishopanishad, and the first canto of the Bhagavatam, and teachings of Lord Chaitanya. So when Nectar of Devotion came out, and Prabhupada made it a big thing. He even gave a little talk about how important it was in Los Angeles. And that explains, what our actual goal is. Our actual goal is Vrajaprem. And then a couple months later, first volume of Krishna book, first volume especially of Krishna book. It's all about Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan. And, we hardly understood what chanting Hare Krishna was, most of us. I mean, I had been a full-time devotee living in the temple when Nectar of Devotion came out, 3 months, maybe 3-4 months. And when Krishna book came out, 6 months. And I've been chanting for a while, but actually seriously taking up sadhana bhakti for maybe 6 months. But just reading Krishna book, first volume of Krishna book, that was a complete revelation. It changed our hearts. It changed the way we saw the world, changed the way we saw ourselves. And I remember reading chapter 31 of Krishna book, Gopi Gita. And then when I finished that chapter, I remember thinking, how old was I then? I had just turned 23. But I remember thinking, oh man, the gopis are the original blues singers. Right? I mean, the Gopi Gita, it's glorifying Krishna, but also complaining. In the second verse, they accuse Krishna of murder. Right? You're killing the maidservants who've given up everything to come be with you. Isn't this just murder? So, just lost my train of thought there for a moment. What, what was your question again, though? What was I talking about that it made me think of it? Oh, yeah. It's ideal if we can find all these qualities, at least to some degree, in the people that we want to associate with. Because, if there's too much, if there's not enough of the svajatiya, then there might be some difficulty. If there's not enough affection, there might be some difficulty. If they're not even at least and not everybody we associate is going to be more advanced than we are, but we want our association to include devotees who are at least a little more advanced than we are, so they can draw us along, they can encourage us. They'll be the people who want us to be better than they are. So we can look for those things. It's not so much a matter of judging the person as judging how intimately we want to associate with them. I think someone came when I was speaking at the mantra house last night. Someone suggested, "Oh, it was a young devotee." I go, "Well, there's some people that you want to associate with from a little distance, right? We can appreciate their what devotion they have, but um, we don't know, maybe there's some qualities in them that we don't want to imbibe, so we keep a little distance. But when we find someone who does have all three of those qualities, that's someone that we can open our hearts to, someone we know we can trust. So we're looking for that. We're never going to, generally not, it's going to be very difficult to find the ideal association. There aren't very many Vaisheshikas or Radhanath Swamis around. I'll tell you a story about Radhanath Swami. When I lived in San Diego, he would visit San Diego every year. And, I was just one of the householders in the community, at least from my perspective. And, but when he would come, first time he would see me, he remembered who I was. And, well, you know how he is. He would say, "Oh, Prabhu, Prabhu, I've been missing you all this time." He'd offer obeisances before I could hit the deck. And then when we'd get up, he'd throw his arms around me and bury his head in my chest. "Oh, I'm so happy to see you, Prabhu, Prabhu." And I was just amazed. All the people he's met in the last year, and he remembers who I am. What's that about? However, in 2000, I think, we moved back to the Big Island from San Diego. So I didn't see Radhanath Swami for 7 years. And when we moved to Alachua in 2007, this was just after we moved there, I received an email one morning that a devotee, a sannyasi who would visit us on the Big Island every year, Bhakti Vibhuta Bodhayan Maharaj, he's the successor of one of Srila Prabhupada's godbrothers, Bhakti Pramod Puri Goswami Maharaj's mission. And he's a very wonderful sannyasi, very generous, open-hearted devotee, wonderful preacher, in his 60s now, and he's still running around like crazy. When I was in Mayapur, I emailed him and I said, "Maharaj, I'm in Mayapur. I'm just up the road from your mat. Are you here?" And he said, "I'm in the UK." And he says, "How long will you be in Mayapur?" And I said, "Well, I'm leaving on the 2nd." And he says, "Oh, I'm arriving on the 4th." So I just thought, okay, this is my ill fortune. So I went to see Bodhayan Maharaj this one morning, and it was early in the morning after Mangalarti, and just he was only going to be there for a day or two, and so I really wanted to see him. I hadn't seen him. I hadn't seen him well in a year And so we were talking, and he said, "Oh, I must. I need. I hear Radhanath Swami is here. I need to talk to him. I wonder how I can meet him." So devotees were suggesting different things, and one devotee was saying, "Well, maybe we can bring Radhanath Swami here." And Bodhayan Maharaj, who's a Bengali gentleman, says, "Oh no, I must go to him. He is so senior." And I thought, well, wait a minute. When Radhanath Swami is in Alacho, he stays with my old dear friends, Mahavishnu Priya and Goshta Bihari. And he's giving class right now. Actually, I'm ditching his class to spend time with you. And I know his classes tend to run a little long. So if I go back now, maybe I can catch him. And if not, I can go to Goshta and Mahavishnu Priya's house. So I got to the temple. Just as Radhanath Swami had finished class and he was coming outside of the temple, he was just stepping out of the temple as I arrived. And I offered obeisances. I got up and I folded my hands and I said, "Maharaj, you may not remember me, but I used to live in San Diego." And he looked at me and he says, "Oh, Prabhu Prabhu." And I'm standing there like, what the actual heck? He hasn't seen me for 7 years, and I'm on I'm on the other side of the continent, completely different surrounding, to completely different context. And it took him just a moment, took him just a hint to remember who I was. That's how extraordinary. So there aren't many of those folks. There's a lot of wonderful devotees in ISKCON, but people of the caliber of Vaisheshika or Radhanath Swami, very rare. So when we have the opportunity for their association, we seize it, even if it's just to sit and listen. Yes. Ooh.
Maharaj, in your answers, you touched upon Raganuga Bhakti. So, like we are sadhakas, we are doing our sadhana bhakti. Will the transition automatically happen, or should we do any other endeavor to also get into Raganuga Bhakti?
Well, what happened automatically?
No, we are sadhaka bhaktas, right? So as part of doing our sadhana, will it naturally someday automatically get into Raganuga Bhakti? Or should we do any special endeavor, like having some greed in Bhakti to get there?
This is a really good question and a touchy one. Raganuga Bhakti is sadhana bhakti. There's a little confusion in the Nectar of Devotion, and it may have been due to the devotees' immaturity when they were transcribing and editing it. But it makes it sound as if sadhana bhakti and Raganuga Bhakti are different things. Vaidhi sadhana bhakti and Raganuga sadhana bhakti are different things, but they're both sadhana bhakti. Now, it's a little complicated, but what distinguishes them are two things: the motive and the goal. So for Vaidhi bhakti, Vaidhi sadhana bhakti, the motive is faith in the instructions of the scriptures and the guru. And the goal is Vaikuntha. For Raganuga Bhakti, the motive is that greed, that intense desire to serve Krishna following in the wake of one of his eternal servants in Vrindavan. And the goal is Braja Prem, is the kind of love that that particular servant or that group of servants has for Krishna. Now, there's a kind of fuzzy area, sort of maybe somewhat liminal area. Thank you so much. Between the two, because although Srila Prabhupada often referred to what we're doing as Vaidhi Bhakti, the acharyas, Jiva Goswami and a couple of the other acharyas as well, explain that for those who don't yet have that greed, but understand that their actual goal is the kind of love for Krishna that the residents of Vrindavan have for him. They engage in the angas of Vaidhi sadhana bhakti, and if we look at the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the main part of the chapter is discussion of those 64 practices as limbs of Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. But if we actually want to serve Krishna in Vrindavan, we engage in those things with an aspiration for attaining Raga Nuga Bhakti. And gradually that greed will grow. And, that's natural because if we sing the bhajans of our acharyas, we see either those glorifying Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, or those glorifying Krishna and his associates in Vrindavan, those things will churn our hearts. We won't be satisfied with just Vaikuntha Prema. And so there's one place where I think it's in the Bhakti Sandarbha, where Srila Jiva Goswami says that if someone is practicing Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti, they're practicing Vaidhi Bhakti, they're following the rules and regulations, but their actual aspiration is for Raga, for Vrindavan Raga. We could call what they're doing Ajata Ruchi Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. It's Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti in which that ruchi, that taste, hasn't yet arisen, that hasn't yet been born. But it'll come. It'll come. And the right association also helps. So, we don't have songs that we sing about Lakshmi and Narayan in Vaikuntha. But we have, Yashomati Nandana Vrajabara Nagara. And actually, speaking of songs, I also wanted to share. There's in Bhaktivinoda Thakur's book of songs on Sharanagati, the introductory song is really cool, really instructive. And my friend Agni Dev sings this song, I think on the last, whatever you call it. We would say CD, but there aren't very many CDs that were printed. It's mostly found online. And this is a really wonderful song that Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote. This is his introductory song to Sharanagati. And he says, Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu descended from the eternal spiritual world along with his personal associates in divine abode, incarnating in this temporary material world out of compassion for the fallen souls, in order to freely distribute the gift of ecstatic love of God, which is very difficult to obtain. He taught the path of Sharanagati, devotional surrender to the Supreme Lord. And he says, he calls this Bhakatera Pran, the life, the very life of the devotees. And then he says the 6 ways, he lists the 6 ways of Sharanagati. And it's interesting that he starts with dainya, or humility, and ends with anukulyasya sankalpa. I remember when I first heard about the 6 angas of bhakti, I thought maybe they were progressive. But he goes in the other direction, which made me, this is maybe 1974 when I first saw these Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Sharanagati songs. So I'd been practicing for 4 years or 5 years or something. And then I started to question, okay, so maybe it's not exactly progressive like I was thinking. And then this verse really strikes me. He says, Sharanga Sharanagati Hoy Bejahar, Tahara Prarthana Shune Sri Nanda Kumar. Sri Nanda Kumar, the youthful son of Nanda Maharaj, hears the prayers of anyone who takes refuge of him by this sixfold practice of bhakti. So sometimes devotees will ask, especially me as an older devotee, as a sannyasi, oh, Maharaj, pray for so-and-so. Or you see on social media, my mom is sick, please pray for her. And I always think, okay, this is a trick. This is my best friend here trying to trick me into actually taking shelter of Krishna so that my prayer will be heard. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be answered the way you want. There was a musical in the early 60s called The Unsinkable Molly Brown. It was a kind of long story about a woman grew up in poverty in Colorado in the 19th century. And she married a silver miner who struck it rich. And so when they're like nouveau riche folks in Denver society, um, there's this song about people complaining that their prayers aren't being answered. And she's Molly Brown's character sings, uh, are you sure your prayers haven't been answered? Now think, children, think. When you pray for riches and glory and he turns around and he makes you humble, it's the meek who will inherit the kingdom. And then at one place, and this struck me when I first heard this as like a teenager, she says, you got your answer. It's not that your prayer wasn't answered. She said, you got your answer. The answer was no. And then there's a little percussion thing there to emphasize that. Um, and sometimes when devotees ask me to pray for them, I'll tell you frankly, we've gotten the opposite result, which is really humbling to me and a little scary. And so sometimes I'll just say, well, oh, Maharaj, pray for me. And I said, you want me to share with you a little bit of my record? And then rethink the request. So I really like this verse, that Krishna hears the prayers of those who take shelter of him through these six angas. And he says, Bhaktivinoda Thakur prostrates himself at the feet of Rupa and Sanatan, places a straw between his teeth and clasps their lotus feet with his hands, weeping and weeping. Kandya, Kandya. There's a lot of Kandya, Kandya in Bhaktivinoda Thakur's songs, a lot of this weeping and weeping, which shows the intensity of his feeling. And weeping and weeping, he tells them, Rupa and Sanatan, I'm certainly the lowest of men. Please make me the worthiest by teaching me the ways of Sharanagati. Yeah, I like that song. I'll sometimes sing that when I'm by myself in my little hut in Honolulu. I have a harmonium, so when my dad passed away, he left me just a little bit of money, and he told me, use it to buy something that will give you joy. And I said, well, maybe it's a good idea if I kind of keep it as a cushion. And he just rolled his eyes and he said, as you like. And I thought, okay, I'm going to get something. So I'd had my eye on a harmonium that was out of my price range. And so I got that. And I got a new iPad, which is now old because he passed away a little over 7 years ago. Old and creaky and slow like me. So it is a complicated question, and it will happen by the force of our practice. Bhakti is the most powerful force there is. There's a verse in it comes from a text. Well, it's cited as from Matara Shruti, which makes it sound like it must be from the Vedas, the Shrutis. Srila Jiva Goswami cites it in his Priti Sandarbha. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur cites one line of it, or one pada, maybe a half a line, in one of his Bhagavad Gita commentaries. Vrindavan Das Thakur cites it in Chaitanya Bhagavat. Bhakti revainam nayati, bhakti revainam darshayati, bhakti vasa purusha, bhakti reva bhuyasi. Only bhakti has the power to bring us near to Krishna. Only bhakti has the power to show us Krishna face to face. Only bhakti has the power to control Krishna. Therefore, bhakti is the most powerful thing of all. Right? One of the six aspects of bhakti that are described in the first chapter of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the last one, Sri Krishna Karshani, that it has the power to attract the all-attractive personality of Godhead. That's real power. So maybe when I have some real bhakti, then he'll start hearing my prayers. I'm trying Sharanagati, but maybe not assiduously enough, not intensely enough. Surrender's a little scary. You ever have those trust building exercises at work? Those team building exercises, and one of them is the trust fall. We used to do that at Hawaii Community College, beginning of the academic year, and it's a moment, where you close your eyes, you put your arms out, you close your eyes, and you just lean back until you no longer have any control. And there's a moment where you just think, please be there for me. And they are. And so Krishna, we should understand Krishna has our back. He promises us that at the end of the Bhagavad Gita. Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja hung twang sarva papibhyo mokshayishyami ma shuchaha. Because I got you covered. Even if there's some sinful reactions that might come from your neglecting your other duties, I've got it covered. I can deliver you from that. I have that power. Trust me. So it'll come as if automatically, I think. I don't know if automatically is the right word, but it comes as if automatic. This is bhakti growing naturally. As long as we feed and water that bhakti lata, it'll keep growing. All the way to Krishna's lotus feet, where it develops buds, then flowers, then fruits. Is it late for you all? What's it going on 10 o'clock? Yeah? Quarter to 10. Vrindavan Natavara. Yeah. We could just keep going until it's time for Mangalarti. But I'm not sure that's going to work. Is there anything else though? Discussing among ourselves, that's life. It's a little weird that I have to sit in a chair and look down at everybody. But...
So, at least briefly, I guess throughout your presentation, I became increasingly worried for myself, because at the beginning you talked about how Shraddha is just being present, taking a moment. And I was really encouraged by that, because I'm like, okay, I can do that. I do that every single day. I'm like, I'm always a guru puja at least. Not even one moment, I give 10. And then I started to, hear some of the scarier points of your presentation, like Lord Narayan says that his devotees only think of him. I'm like, okay, well, I'm not on the list then, because I'm thinking of all these other things constantly besides the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that's a problem. And then you also mentioned that, one of the limbs of Sharanagati completely casting off things that are not in the Lord's interest. Oh my God. Terrifying. I thought about how for some people, that like live in the ashram or something, it's a little bit easier to constantly be thinking about the Lord because you don't really have a choice. There's always kirtan playing in the background, in the pujari room and in the kitchen and so on, whatever you're doing. But, for those of us who are out in the scary world every single day, it's really a struggle to remain focused. And I think several of the comments in the discussion this evening have touched on that. It's really hard to stay focused. And it becomes like daunting to the point of we may even start to feel a little helpless because we just see how far we are from that, completely casting off that which is not what Krishna favors. So yeah, I'm I know what the first step is. I've heard your instructions that like we have to just take small steps. We have to just do what we can. We have to continue practicing our sadhana. But I'm not sure that's enough to maintain hope. How to maintain hope.
Yeah, how do we maintain hope? How do we keep that confidence, as Subhadra was pointing out? And the thing we want, the one thing we can understand about bhakti is that it is a process. It's an ongoing process, and that the goal is bhakti, right? The goal is service. More than Krishna, more than attaining Krishna, our goal is to attain service to Krishna. That's the thing that haunts us, right? The experience that we have by having served Krishna. In his commentary on that verse, and that's a really instructive verse, 1:5:19, that even if we find difficulty, we're never lost. In his purport, Srila Prabhupada uses the example of, well, there's a difference between an orphan and maybe the runaway the prodigal son of a king. Is the orphan's really lost, but the king's son is always going to be under the watchful gaze of his father. He's always got someone in the crowd looking out for him to make sure that he doesn't get into too much trouble. So Srila Prabhupada says that even if devotees fall away, and it's interesting, the verse I think suggests something like somehow or other. Srila Prabhupada suggests by poor association. And he says that twice in his purport. And in Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary, he says poor determination twice. I think the two things are linked. Still, we're not lost. So, that he says, Prabhupada says that even if the devotees fall away, they're never the same. Even if they seem to imitate the karmis or the gyanis, they're really never the same as the karmis or gyanis. They're never lost. I remember this was pointed out once in a meeting in Honolulu, maybe in the early 80s. And someone kept was complaining about a couple of ex-devotees. And it was former leaders who had given up their service and apparently fallen away. And the person conducting the meeting asked me, Babaru, get me the first volume of the first canto, open it to chapter 5, text 19. He had me read the verse and the purport. And then he looked at the devotee who asked the question, who was making the complaints. He says, there is no such thing as an ex-devotee. And he gave examples of the people that this guy was complaining about. So-and-so is not an ex-devotee. Such and such is not an ex-devotee. I really appreciated his broad vision there. I had other problems with this devotee, and he eventually gave up his service and fell away, and actually completely disappeared from the Association of Devotees for decades. But there's no such thing as an ex-devotee, and this devotee is now living in Mayapur, working on the TOVP project full time. We just keep going. Yeah, these things are there. Narayan says, yeah, they don't know, the devotees don't know anything but me. But he also says, and I don't know anything but them. So whatever bhakti we have, that eventually has the power to conquer Krishna. In the Bhakti Sandarbha, Srila Jiva Goswami makes an argument that even sadhana bhakti has some power to control Krishna. And he uses, there's, 6, 7 verses in the second chapter of the Bhagavatam, those verses that kind of trace out the 9 stages of bhakti. And it's interesting, in his commentary on, I think it's text 21, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur suggests 14 stages of bhakti. So you've got a couple of preliminary things that kind of look like a Gyanta Sukriti before Shraddha, and then maybe something intermediary, and then you've got a couple of stages after Prema, further development of Prema. And as an old English major, those 14 stages suggest to me a sonnet or a sonnet cycle. And it's given me the idea to write. And I actually have a couple of sonnets that I wrote years ago that might answer to that Adau Shraddha and Sadhu Sangha. But, and maybe Bhajana Kriya. I'd have to think about it. I'd have to look at them and think about it again. But then I thought, well, if I'm writing these sonnets from my personal experience, what do I do about Nishtha? Am I really steady? Do I really have any experience of steady practice? Not to speak of Ruchi, Asakti, Bhava, or Prema. Like, what am I going to do about that? Plus the further stages of Prema. So he makes this argument using these verses, and he shows that all but one half of those verses address sadhana bhakti. So he says, so we have to see here, the conclusion is that even sadhana bhakti has some power to control Krishna. Otherwise, how is it that Krishna would give the sadhaka bhava? So it's a real interesting argument, even though he makes the opposite point in his commentary on that Sri Krishna Karshini in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. He says, oh, Sri Krishna Karshini, we have to, obviously we're talking about accomplished bhakti, sadhya bhakti, not sadhana bhakti. But in the Bhakti Sandarbha, he makes this argument very strongly that just as Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, from the first day of worshiping the Lord, we become haunted by rasa, whatever little rasa we've tasted. So we understand that this is a long, as we say, long row to hoe, right? But if we persist, we will get there. And it's something that's not necessary. Even when we attain perfection, even when we attain prema, we still get to take another birth in the material world, right? Uh, the the Sri Vaishnavas, their goal is Vaikuntha. So once they attain perfection, their next breath or whatever, their next moment is in Vaikuntha when they give up their body. For us, it's not like that. We get to take another birth. We take a birth um, on some planet in the material world where Krishna's appearing to have his pastimes, and we get further training by associating with Krishna's eternal associates in that Bhoma Vrindavan, that earthly Vrindavan. So sometimes we say, "Oh, we sing the birthday song, happy birthday song, may you never take birth again." But we actually really want at least one more birth. We want to be able. We want we're at, what we're hoping for is the opportunity to take birth from the womb of a gopi in some earthly Vrindavan, in some, the planet where Krishna's manifesting his pastimes in some universe in the material world. So we get further training, and then we enter Goloka Vrindavan. Srila Prabhupada explained that in the early days. Um, so yeah, it's a little, it's a little more complicated. So we know this is a many lifetime process. We've all, I would assume, we've all been practicing bhakti for a few lifetimes, and we're just still working at it. And I think that's pretty cool that we have that opportunity. That it's not the kind of path whose attainments are temporary. That'll evaporate with time. What did Shakespeare say? Love's not time's fool. Is that okay? Don't give up. You're young. You got your whole life ahead of you. Is this a good? I'm seeing that everyone else is starting to get a little bleary-eyed. Does that mean it's okay for me to suggest that we conclude our discussion? We want Vrindavan Natavar uh, and others to. So I'm probably not going to make it to Mangalarti tomorrow. I'll be honest. I have devotees insisting that that I take care of myself. So I'm going to try to make sure that I get at least 6 hours of sleep. I don't know if it'll happen, but I'm going to try. Thank you all so much for your company. Thank you for inviting me and everything. What can I say? And the discussion, I think, is just wonderful. It'll probably take me a little time to wind down from such wonderfully stimulating discussion.
So grateful actually. Your presence, your gentleness, and after hearing this class, it's so obvious to everyone that at least I felt that a close family member, you are spending so much time with so much energy and enthusiasm with all of us, answering all these questions, and you are also giving your life examples that really nourished our hearts.
Oh,
Please, whenever you make a visit to ISP, please keep our home as your orbit, and then
okay.
please stop by and then
It's a deal.
enlighten us. Thank you very much.
And just one housekeeping note, if anyone wants to hear more from Marge while he's in the Bay Area, um, he'll be at Guru Maharaj's Bhagavatam class tomorrow morning, so you could meet him there. But he'll also be at the Kirtan in the Park event with Janavi, Jivana Devi, and others at Dolores Park tomorrow afternoon.